What happens when one of television's most beloved hosts walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a friendly chat and instead finds himself in the middle of a full-blown attack on live television? In just 45 seconds, a simple question about his career would trigger a meltdown so explosive that it would end with Graham Norton storming off the Loose Women set, leaving the panel in complete chaos and the studio audience sitting in stunned silence. Graham Norton arrived at the Loose Women studio that morning with his usual warmth and that famous smile everyone knows and loves. He was there to talk about his latest projects, maybe share a few funny stories, and have a good laugh with the panel. What he didn't know was that Denise Welch had other plans entirely. As Graham settled into his seat on the famous couch, the audience applauded enthusiastically. He waved, beamed at the cameras, and exchanged pleasant hellos with the panel. Sitting alongside Denise were Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Kay Adams. The atmosphere seemed light and friendly at first. Ruth opened the conversation with a gentle question about Graham's recent work. He responded with his characteristic charm, telling a delightful anecdote that had the audience chuckling. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Just another day on Loose Women with a beloved guest. Then Denise leaned forward. "Graham, I have to ask you something," Denise said, her tone shifting noticeably. "Don't you think your show has become a bit, repetitive? The same format, the same jokes, year after year?" The audience went quiet. Graham's smile faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly, keeping his composure. "Well, Denise, I think our viewers enjoy the format. We've been on air for many years because people seem to like what we do," Graham replied diplomatically, his voice still friendly, despite the pointed nature of the question. Denise wasn't finished. She sat back in her chair with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Yes, but surely you must get bored of it all. Interviewing celebrities, the red couch, the same old song and dance. I mean, how many times can you flip a chair and pretend it's hilarious?" Janet and Kay exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ruth shifted in her seat, clearly sensing the tension building. The audience remained silent, unsure whether this was playful banter or something more serious. Graham maintained his pleasant demeanor, though his eyes showed a flicker of confusion. "I actually love what I do, Denise. Every guest is different. Every show brings something new. I'm very fortunate to have a job I'm passionate about," he said calmly. Denise let out a short laugh that sounded more like a scoff. "Passionate? Oh, please, Graham. Let's be honest here. You're coasting. You've been coasting for years. When was the last time you actually challenged yourself?" The air in the studio became thick with awkwardness. Ruth attempted to intervene. "Denise, I think that's a bit unfair," Ruth said gently. "Graham's show is incredibly successful, and he's won numerous awards." Denise turned to Ruth with an irritated expression. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking, Ruth. Someone needs to be honest with him." Graham's smile had completely disappeared now. He sat up straighter, his voice still measured, but with a new edge to it. "I'm sorry, Denise, but I'm not sure where this is coming from. I came here today to have a pleasant conversation, not to be attacked." Denise rolled her eyes dramatically. "Attacked? Oh, don't be so sensitive. This is what we do on this show. We have real conversations. Or can't you handle a bit of honesty?" Kay Adams tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. "Graham, tell us about your upcoming projects. I heard you have some exciting things in the works," Kay said, her voice bright but strained. Before Graham could answer, Denise jumped back in. "Yes, let me guess. More of the same? Another series of the exact same show you've been doing forever? How thrilling." Graham turned to face Denise directly, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Denise, I'm genuinely confused. Have I done something to offend you? Because this feels very personal." Denise leaned forward again, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's not personal, Graham. I just think you've become complacent. You've built this little empire where everyone tells you how wonderful you are. and you've stopped growing as a broadcaster. You're stuck in your comfort zone. Janet Street Porter finally spoke up, her distinctive voice cutting through the tension. Hang on a minute, Denise. That's completely out of order. Graham is a guest on this show, and you're being incredibly rude. Denise spun to face Janet, her face flushing with anger. Oh, so now I'm not allowed to have an opinion? This is typical. Everyone's so worried about hurting people's feelings that we can't have honest discussions anymore. Ruth tried once more to calm the situation. There's a difference between honest discussion and being needlessly cruel, Denise. Graham has done nothing to deserve this treatment. The audience began murmuring among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Graham sat quietly, his jaw clenched, his hands folded in his lap. Denise ignored Ruth completely and turned back to Graham. You know what your problem is, Graham? You're too safe. You never take risks. You never say anything controversial. You just sit there with your A-list celebrities, giggling at their stories, making sure everyone likes you. Where's the edge? Where's the real you? Graham's eyes narrowed. His voice, when he spoke, was cold and controlled. The real me? The real me is someone who treats people with respect. The real me is someone who creates a space where guests feel comfortable and valued. The real me doesn't need to tear others down to feel important. The words hung in the air like a slap. Denise's face went red. Are you saying that's what I'm doing? Tearing you down to feel important? She said, her voice rising. Graham stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. I'm saying that I came here as a guest, expecting professional courtesy, and instead, I've been subjected to a series of insults disguised as honesty. I don't need to sit here and take this. Ruth stood as well, reaching out toward Graham. Graham, please don't go. I'm so sorry about this. This isn't how we normally conduct ourselves, Ruth said, her voice genuinely apologetic. Denise remained seated, but her voice got louder. Oh, here we go. He can dish it out, but he can't take it. Typical. Run away, Graham. Go back to your safe little bubble where everyone worships you. Graham turned to face Denise one final time. His voice was steady, but filled with quiet anger. I have nothing to prove to you, Denise. I've built a career on kindness, on celebrating people, on creating joy. If you see that as weakness, that says far more about you than it does about me. Denise shot to her feet, pointing her finger at Graham. Don't you dare lecture me about my character. You don't know anything about me. You come on here with your perfect image, acting like you're better than everyone else. Graham's response was calm, but devastating. I never said I was better than anyone, but I do know how to treat people with basic human decency. Something you seem to have forgotten. Janet stood up and moved toward Graham. You're absolutely right to be upset, Graham. This has been appalling. Kay nodded in agreement, also rising from her seat. I'm so embarrassed this happened. You deserve an apology, Kay said. Denise let out a bitter laugh. Oh, wonderful. Everyone's defending precious Graham Norton. God forbid anyone challenges the great man. Graham began removing his microphone, his movements sharp and angry now. Challenging someone and attacking. Them are two different things, Denise. You haven't asked me a single genuine question. You've simply hurled insults, and then acted shocked when I don't sit here and smile through it. Ruth moved closer to Denise, her voice low but firm. Denise, you need to stop. This has gone too far. Denise ignored her, keeping her focus on Graham. You're being ridiculous. I was just trying to have a real conversation. I'm sorry if you can't handle that. Graham finished removing his microphone and placed it carefully on the couch. His voice was ice cold. That wasn't a conversation. That was an ambush, and I refused to be part of it. The audience watched in complete silence as Graham began to walk toward the exit. Denise called after him. Fine, leave. Show everyone how thin-skinned you really are. Can't take a little criticism, can you? Graham stopped walking, but didn't turn around. His voice carried across the studio. Criticism would have been welcome, Denise. What you did was bullying. There's a difference, and deep down, you know it. With that, he continued walking. Ruth rushed after him. Graham, please wait, she called out. Janet turned to Denise, her face a mask of fury. Are you happy now? You've just humiliated one of the most respected people in British television on live television. Denise crossed her arms defensively. I didn't humiliate him. He humiliated himself by being so sensitive. Kay shook her head in disbelief. Sensitive? Denise, you attacked him from the moment he sat down. You were hostile and aggressive for no reason. The cameras continued rolling as Ruth caught up with Graham near the studio exit. The microphones picked up their conversation. Graham, I am so sorry. I had no idea she was going to do that. Please know that doesn't represent how we all feel, Ruth said, her voice trembling with emotion. Graham's face softened slightly as he looked at Ruth. I know, Ruth. I don't blame you or the others. But I can't. Stay here. I won't sit there and be disrespected like that. Back on the set, the argument between Denise and the remaining panelists continued to escalate. Janet's voice grew louder. You owe him an apology, Denise. What you did was disgraceful. Denise's face twisted with anger. I'm not apologizing for speaking my mind. If he can't handle the truth, that's his problem. Kay stood up, her voice shaking. The truth? You didn't speak any truths. You just attacked him because, what? You felt like it? You wanted to make yourself look tough? Well, congratulations. You just made us all look terrible. The audience began to stir, some people whispering to each other, others looking around uncertainly. A few audience members were shaking their heads in disapproval. Near the exit, Graham turned back to Ruth. Tell Janet and Kay I appreciate their support. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. Ruth nodded, tears visible in her eyes. Will you ever come back? After this? Graham paused, considering his words carefully. That depends entirely on whether Denise is here. I won't put myself in that position again. As Graham finally exited through the studio doors, Ruth walked slowly back to the set. The cameras captured every moment of her return, her face showing a mixture of anger and sadness. When she reached the couch, Ruth turned to Denise. He's gone. I hope you're satisfied. Denise's defiant expression wavered for just a moment. He chose to leave. I didn't force him. Janet slammed her hand on the armrest. You absolutely forced him. You created an environment so hostile that he had no choice but to leave. You should be ashamed of yourself. Denise's voice rose again. Oh, stop being so dramatic. It was just a conversation that got a bit heated. He'll be fine. Kay turned to face the camera, her professional composure barely holding. We need to take a break. We'll be right back. As the show cut to commercial, cameras lingered on the scene for just a moment longer. Denise sat alone on one end of the couch, while Ruth, Janet, and Kay stood together on the other side of the set, talking in low, angry voices. The couch where Graham had been sitting just minutes before sat empty, a stark reminder of what had just unfolded. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had witnessed. Some were already pulling out their phones, no doubt ready to share what they had just seen. Others simply stared at the empty space where Graham had been, unable to believe that such a beloved figure had been treated so poorly. When the show returned from commercial break, the atmosphere was completely different. Denise sat quietly, her earlier fire seemingly extinguished. Ruth took the lead, her voice professional but strained. We want to address what just happened before the break, Ruth began. Our guest, Graham Norton, has left the show. There was a disagreement between him and Denise that escalated beyond what any of us anticipated. Janet jumped in, her voice tight. Let's be clear. Graham did nothing wrong. He was a gracious guest who was subjected to unfair treatment. He had every right to leave. Kay nodded in agreement. We pride ourselves on having robust discussions on this show, but what happened today crossed a line. It wasn't a discussion. It was an attack. Denise finally spoke, her voice noticeably quieter than before. I was just trying to ask challenging questions. Ruth turned to her sharply. No, Denise. You weren't asking challenging questions. You were being deliberately provocative and disrespectful. There's a huge difference. The tension among the panel was palpable. Janet refused to even look at Denise. I've been on this show for years, and I've never been more embarrassed. Graham Norton is a consummate professional, a talented broadcaster, and by all accounts, a genuinely lovely person. He deserved better than what he got today. Denise shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I may have been a bit harsh. Kay's response was immediate and sharp. A bit harsh? Denise, you called his career repetitive, accused him of coasting, said he was stuck in a comfort zone, and then mocked him when he tried to defend himself. That's not a bit harsh. That's cruel. Ruth addressed the camera directly. To Graham Norton, if you're watching, we are deeply sorry. You came here as our guest, and you were treated appallingly. You handled yourself with grace and dignity in a situation where many people would have lost their temper. Janet added her own message. Graham, you were absolutely right to leave. No one should have to sit through that. We understand and support your decision completely. Denise remained silent, staring down at her hands. Her body language had completely changed from the confident, aggressive posture she had displayed earlier. She looked small and defensive now. The show continued, but the energy never recovered. Every topic they tried to discuss felt flat and forced. The audience, normally engaged and lively, remained subdued. The joy and warmth that usually characterized Loose Women had been completely extinguished. During another segment, Ruth attempted to discuss a lighter topic, but the conversation kept circling back to what had happened. An audience member raised her hand during the interactive portion of the show. Can I just say, I've been watching Graham Norton for years, and he's never been anything but kind and professional. What happened today was really upsetting to watch. The audience erupted in applause, clearly in agreement. Ruth nodded. Thank you for saying that. I think many of us feel the same way. Another audience member spoke up. I don't understand why Denise was so aggressive from the start. Did something happen before the show? All eyes turned to Denise. She shook her head. Nothing happened. I thought we could have a more challenging conversation. Janet's voice dripped with sarcasm. Well, mission accomplished. You certainly challenged him right off the set. As the show neared its end, Ruth made one final statement. Today's show didn't go as planned. We had hoped to have a fun, engaging conversation with Graham Norton. Instead, things took a turn that none of us wanted. We can only apologize to Graham, to our viewers, and to everyone who expected better from us today. Kay spoke directly to the camera. Graham Norton represents the best of British television. His warmth, his humor, his ability to make guests feel comfortable. These are qualities we should celebrate, not attack. He deserved so much better than what happened here today. Janet had the final word before the show's closing. I hope this serves as a reminder that there's a difference between honest discussion and personal attacks. We crossed a line today, and it cost us a wonderful guest, and more importantly, it cost us our integrity. Denise said nothing, her earlier bravado completely gone. She sat motionless as the closing credits began to roll, the weight of what had happened clearly settling on her shoulders. The studio audience filed out quietly, many still shaking their heads or talking in hushed voices about what they had witnessed. The atmosphere was somber, a stark contrast to the usual upbeat energy that followed a Loose Women taping. Backstage, crew members stood in small groups, discussing the unprecedented walkout. Graham Norton's empty dressing room stood as a silent testament to the chaos that had unfolded. His belongings had been quickly gathered, his departure swift and final. The panel remained on set even after the cameras stopped rolling. Ruth sat with her head in her hands. Janet paced back and forth, still visibly angry. Kay stared at the floor, clearly processing everything that had happened. Denise finally stood up and walked toward the exit without saying a word to any of her fellow panelists. As she reached the door, Janet called out, "You know what the worst part is, Denise? He came here with nothing but good intentions. He was excited to be here, and you destroyed that for no reason." Denise paused, but didn't turn around. After a moment, she continued walking, disappearing through the door and leaving the others behind. Ruth looked up at Janet and Kay. "How do we come back from this?" Janet sighed deeply. "I don't know if we can. Not easily, anyway." The incident had unfolded in a way no one could have predicted. What should have been a delightful interview with one of television's most beloved personalities had instead become a masterclass in how not to treat a guest. The contrast between Graham's calm professionalism and Denise's aggressive hostility had been stark and uncomfortable to watch. Throughout the entire ordeal, Graham had maintained his composure, refusing to sink to the level of personal attacks despite multiple provocations. He had defended himself with dignity, stated his boundaries clearly, and when those boundaries were repeatedly violated, he made the difficult decision to remove himself from the situation. The empty couch, the subdued audience, the fractured panel, all of it painted a picture of a show that had lost its way, at least for that one fateful taping. The warmth and camaraderie that loose women usually embodied had been replaced by tension, anger, and regret. As the studio lights dimmed and the crew began breaking down the set, one thing was abundantly clear. This was a moment that would not be easily forgotten. The day Graham Norton walked off the Loose Women set would be remembered not for what was said, but for how it was said. And more importantly, for how one man chose to stand up for himself with grace and dignity in the face of unwarranted hostility.